Commander Zethkri had seen many battles across the galaxy. His purple carapace bore the scars of countless engagements against the Hive Lords of Zentaurus Prime, and his 4 eyes had witnessed the fall of 3 star systems. But nothing in his 200 years of military service had prepared him for what he was seeing now. The human soldiers moved through the Nexian war zone like they were taking a casual walk through a garden. Plasma bolts that would have sent his own troops diving for cover barely made them flinch. They chatted among themselves as if they were discussing the weather, not fighting for their lives against one of the most feared military forces in the known galaxy. "Martinez, you see that bunker at 2 o'clock?" called out Sergeant Jackson, a stocky human with graying hair and arms that looked like they could crush a Valorian skull with ease. "The one with the automated turrets and the energy shields?" Martinez replied, barely glancing up from where he was casually reloading his weapon while explosions erupted around him. "Yeah, I see it." "Think you can take it out with one of those fancy grenades of yours?" Martinez grinned, showing his teeth in that predatory way that made Zethkri's species instinctively want to flee. "One? Sarge? You're insulting me. I could take that thing out with a rock if I had to." The alien commander watched in growing disbelief as Martinez pulled out what humans called a frag grenade. To Zethkri's trained eye, it looked primitive compared to the plasma explosives his own forces used, yet somehow, Martinez threw it with such precision that it bounced off 2 walls and rolled directly into the bunker's firing port. The explosion that followed took out not just the bunker, but 3 Nexian heavy infantry units that had been using it for cover. "Show off," muttered another human voice over the comm channel. Zethkri's second-in-command, Sub-Commander Veltar, pressed close to him behind their hastily erected barrier. The younger officer's voice shook with barely contained terror. "Sir, they're not even using cover properly. Look at them." The commander followed his subordinate's gaze and felt his blood run cold. A human medic named Thompson was tending to a wounded soldier in the middle of an active fire zone. Nexian pulse rifles were sending deadly energy beams all around them. But Thompson worked with steady hands as if he were in a hospital, not a battlefield. "Almost got you that time, Doc," the wounded soldier joked as a plasma bolt scorched the ground inches from his head. "Please," Thompson replied without looking up from his work. "I've had paper cuts that were more threatening than these guys." The wounded human laughed. Actually laughed, while bleeding and under enemy fire. Zethkri had allied with humans because the Galactic Council had assured him they were competent fighters. What they had failed to mention was that humans were completely insane. The battle had started 6 hours ago, when Nexian forces had launched a surprise attack on the colony world of Haven's Rest. The initial assault had been devastating. The Nexians had brought their best: atmospheric fighters, heavy armor, and their elite Crimson Guard units that had conquered 17 worlds in the past decade. It should have been a massacre. The human garrison was outnumbered 3 to 1, and the civilian population had no military training whatsoever. Any civilized species would have surrendered within the first hour. Instead, the humans had done something that defied all military logic. They had counterattacked. Not content to simply defend their positions, human soldiers had charged straight into enemy lines while their civilians evacuated. Zethkri had watched human teenagers, barely old enough to serve in his own military, volunteer to carry ammunition to the front lines. He had seen human elders, individuals who should have been safely tucked away in shelters, manning communication stations and coordinating supply runs. But it was the soldiers themselves that truly defied comprehension. Private Chen, who couldn't have weighed more than 60 kilograms, had single-handedly destroyed a Nexian heavy walker by climbing onto its back and jamming her rifle into its primary sensor array. When the machine had tried to shake her off, she had simply held on tighter and started laughing. "This is better than the carnival rides back home," she had shouted over the comm. Sergeant Williams had used a damaged human vehicle as an improvised battering ram, driving it straight through a Nexian command post while whistling what humans called a tune. He had emerged from the wreckage covered in purple alien blood and his own red blood, grinning like he had just won some kind of prize. "Ma always said I was a terrible driver," he had quipped. Guess she was wrong. Now, as Zethkri watched the battle unfold, he began to understand why the Nexian forces were faltering. It was not because the humans were better equipped or better trained. It was because they were impossible to demoralize. When Nexian psychological warfare units had broadcast images of human prisoners being executed, the humans had responded by fighting harder. When the Nexians had threatened to orbital bombard the civilian shelters, human soldiers had laughed and made jokes about how the Nexians were running out of creative ideas. The breaking point came when Captain Lisa Kane, the human commanding officer, received word that Nexian reinforcements were approaching. Any reasonable military leader would have begun planning a fighting retreat. Kane's response was to turn to her communications officer and say, "Tell the boys we're about to have company. And someone break out the good coffee. This is going to be fun." Zethkri keyed his comm unit. "Captain Kane, with respect, the incoming Nexian forces include their Dreadnought-class ships. You have perhaps 15 minutes before they arrive in orbit. Your casualties are already significant. Logic dictates a tactical withdrawal." Kane's reply came back immediately, and Zethkri could hear the smile in her voice. "Commander, I appreciate the concern, but we're just getting warmed up. These Nexian boys haven't seen anything yet." The human captain was not exaggerating. As the Nexian reinforcements approached, Kane's forces began implementing what she called Plan B. Zethkri soon learned that human military planning was even more disturbing than human combat tactics. What they called Plan B involved using the colony's industrial fabrication units to rapidly produce what humans termed improvised explosive devices. The fact that they could manufacture military-grade explosives from farming equipment and household chemicals in under 10 minutes was concerning enough. The fact that they seemed to enjoy doing it was terrifying. "Sarah, you finished with those fertilizer bombs?" Kane called out to a human engineer. "Just put the finishing touches on them, Captain," came the cheerful reply. "These babies should give our visitors a real warm welcome." Zethkri realized that humans had a very different definition of warm welcome than most species. The Nexian reinforcements arrived exactly on schedule, their massive ships blotting out the sun as they took position in orbit. Their ground forces began deploying immediately, confident that their overwhelming numbers would crush any remaining resistance. They were not prepared for what happened next. The humans had spent their 15 minutes of preparation time turning every building in the colony into a potential weapon. When the Nexian troops advanced, they found themselves walking into what Kane cheerfully described as a really big surprise party. The first Nexian assault wave was destroyed by a series of coordinated explosions that brought down 3 city blocks on top of them. The second wave found themselves trapped in a maze of debris and improvised barriers while human snipers picked them off from impossible angles. But it was the third wave that encountered something truly unprecedented in galactic warfare. As they advanced through the colony's central district, they found themselves facing what appeared to be a group of human civilians. Elderly humans, human children, and even some humans who were clearly injured or disabled had formed a defensive line. The Nexian commander, following standard military doctrine, ordered his troops to scatter the civilians with minimal force. His soldiers advanced confidently, expecting easy surrender. Instead, the human elderly began throwing objects that Zethkri's sensors identified as rocks and bottles. The human children scattered and began what they called guerrilla tactics, appearing from hiding spots to disable equipment before vanishing again. The injured humans, some of whom were missing limbs or using mobility aids, fought with a ferocity that left Nexian veterans stunned. An elderly human female who could not have weighed more than 50 kilograms and appeared to be at least 80 standard years old, was observed disabling a Nexian power armor unit by jamming what appeared to be a knitting needle into its primary joint. "That's for tracking mud through my garden, you purple-skinned varmint," she was heard saying as the much larger alien soldier collapsed. A human child, who appeared to be no more than 12 years old, successfully diverted an entire Nexian squad by convincing them to chase him through what turned out to be a carefully planned route through unstable rubble. When the rubble collapsed, trapping the squad, the child had waved at them cheerfully before running off to help Uncle Pete with his project. Zethkri later learned that Uncle Pete's project involved turning the colony's water treatment plant into a massive chemical weapon. As the battle continued, the commander began to notice something else about human tactics. They seemed to actually enjoy the chaos of combat. While his own troops required constant encouragement and strict discipline to maintain fighting effectiveness, humans became more effective the more desperate the situation became. When Sergeant Martinez found himself surrounded by 12 Nexian soldiers, his response was not to call for backup or attempt to retreat. Instead, he had laughed and said, "Finally, a fair fight." Martinez proceeded to defeat all 12 opponents using what appeared to be a combination of military training and something he called barroom brawling techniques. When reinforcements arrived, they found him sitting on a pile of unconscious Nexian soldiers, sharing a drink from his canteen with the few who were still conscious. "You boys fight pretty good," he told his defeated enemies conversationally, "but you really need to work on your ground game." The Nexian soldiers stared at him with the universal expression of sapients who had just had their understanding of reality fundamentally challenged. It was then that Zethkri began to understand why the humans called their home planet a death world. Most species in the galaxy had evolved on worlds where cooperation and peace were necessary for survival. Predators were rare, environmental hazards were minimal, and natural disasters were uncommon. Species learned to work together because their worlds rewarded collaborative behavior. Earth, it seemed, was different. From what Zethkri had learned, humans had evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill them. Their weather could destroy cities without warning. Their planet was covered with creatures that were venomous, predatory, or simply massive enough to accidentally crush smaller life forms. Even their plant life could be deadly. In such an environment, the species that survived would not be the most peaceful or the most cooperative. They would be the most adaptable, the most resilient, and the most capable of turning any situation to their advantage. Watching human soldiers treat a life-or-death battle like an enjoyable challenge suddenly made perfect sense. Captain Kane's voice crackled over the comm system. "All units, Nexian command ship is beginning orbital bombardment preparation. We've got about 5 minutes before they start raining fire from above." Any civilized species would have used those 5 minutes to surrender or to make peace with their chosen deities. The humans used them to implement what Kane called Plan C. Zethkri was afraid to ask what Plan C involved, but his curiosity overcame his better judgment. "Captain Kane, what exactly is Plan C?" The pause that followed was somehow more ominous than any battle cry. "Commander," Kane said finally, "Plan C is where things get interesting." Commander Zethkri discovered that when humans said things were about to get interesting, what they actually meant was that they were about to do something that would violate several laws of physics and at least 3 articles of the Galactic Warfare Convention. Plan C, as it turned out, involved turning the entire colony into what Captain Kane cheerfully described as one really big mousetrap. While Nexian forces prepared for orbital bombardment, human engineers had been busy rewiring the colony's power grid, industrial facilities, and defensive systems into something that definitely had not been in the original blueprints. "Thompson, You got those medical scanners rigged up? Kane called out to the medic who had been treating wounded soldiers in the middle of enemy fire. All set, Cap, Thompson replied, somehow managing to sound both professional and excited. Turn them into targeting systems. If it's got a heartbeat and it's purple, our automated systems will know exactly where it is. Zethkri blinked all four of his eyes. You converted medical equipment into weapons targeting systems in 15 minutes? 17 minutes, corrected Martinez, who was helping drag what appeared to be a massive industrial mining laser into position. But who's counting? The mining laser, Zethkri learned, was normally used for extracting precious metals from asteroid cores. The humans had decided it would work just as well for extracting Nexian ships from the sky. Sir, Sub-Commander Veltar whispered urgently, they're aiming mining equipment at warships. That laser is designed for cutting through rock, not military-grade armor. Nexian armor is basically just really expensive rock, said Private Chen, who had apparently been listening in on their conversation. Plus, this baby's got a few modifications. The modifications turned out to include routing the colony's entire power grid through the mining laser's focusing array. What had originally been a precise tool for surgical metal extraction was now a weapon capable of cutting a Nexian dreadnought in half. The first orbital bombardment began exactly on schedule. Massive energy beams lanced down from the Nexian fleet, designed to level entire city blocks. The beams struck the colony's surface and simply disappeared. Zethkri's sensors went wild, trying to figure out where the energy had gone. The answer came when the mining laser fired its first shot. The humans had not simply built a bigger weapon. They had somehow managed to capture the incoming bombardment energy and redirect it back at the attacking ships. The Nexian dreadnought that had fired the opening shot found itself being hit by its own weapons, amplified by the colony's industrial power systems. The massive warship's shields flickered and died under the unexpected assault. Chen, remind me to send a thank you note to whoever built their targeting systems, Kane said conversationally as she watched the enemy ship begin venting atmosphere. Makes our job a lot easier when they paint their own targets for us. The Nexian fleet, confused by the unexpected resistance, increased their bombardment intensity. This turned out to be exactly what the humans had hoped for. Each incoming energy beam was captured, stored, and redirected back at the attacking ships with interest. Within minutes, the supposedly invincible Nexian fleet found themselves under devastating attack from their own weapons. But the humans were not content to simply play defense. Williams, you ready with the party favors? Kane asked. Sergeant Williams grinned from behind what looked like a jury-rigged missile launcher. Been ready for the last 10 minutes, Cap. Just say the word. Light them up. What followed was something that Zethkri would later struggle to explain to his superiors. The humans launched what they called care packages toward the Nexian fleet. According to his sensors, these were not sophisticated guided missiles or plasma torpedoes. They were simple chemical rockets loaded with what appeared to be industrial materials. The care packages should have been easily intercepted by the warship's defensive systems. Instead, they somehow made it through the fleet's shields and armor as if they were not even there. The explosions that followed were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Nexian warships, some of which had been in service for over a century, simply came apart like children's toys. How? Zethkri asked, his voice barely audible. How are chemical explosives penetrating military-grade shields? Martinez looked over at him with the patient expression of someone explaining something very simple to a child. Commander, those aren't just chemical explosives. Sarah mixed in some stuff from the geology lab. Stuff from the geology lab? You know, elements that don't like being compressed, or heated, or looked at funny. Martinez shrugged. Turn out unstable isotopes make for really impressive fireworks. Zethkri realized the humans had somehow manufactured antimatter explosives using equipment designed for mineral analysis. The Nexian fleet, faced with losing ships to what their sensors insisted were primitive chemical rockets, made the tactical decision to withdraw to a safer distance. This proved to be exactly what the humans had been counting on. "Phase 2, people," Kane announced. "Time to take this show on the road." Phase 2 involved the humans doing something that Zethkri had never seen in 2 centuries of military service. They abandoned their defensive positions and launched a direct assault on the Nexian ground forces, not a carefully planned advance with proper support and covering fire, not a tactical withdrawal to more defensible positions. A full frontal attack by soldiers who outnumbered nearly 4 to 1 against an enemy that had orbital bombardment capabilities. The human battle cry as they charged was particularly disturbing. Instead of traditional war cries or patriotic slogans, they were shouting things like, "Remember the Alamo!" and "For Uncle Pete's water treatment plant." Private Rodriguez had somehow acquired a Nexian heavy weapon during the fighting and was using it to clear enemy positions while singing what he called mariachi music at the top of his lungs. The combination of devastating firepower and cheerful singing was having a profound psychological effect on enemy morale. Sergeant Jackson had organized a group of human civilians into what he called a flanking maneuver. The flanking maneuver consisted of elderly humans providing covering fire while human children planted explosive devices in enemy supply lines. The children treated it like some kind of game, competing to see who could disable the most equipment before being spotted. One human child, who could not have been older than 10, successfully sabotaged a Nexian command vehicle by simply walking up to it and asking the guards if they wanted to see something cool. While the confused Nexian soldiers tried to figure out how to communicate with a juvenile human, the child had attached several explosive devices to critical systems. The explosion destroyed not only the command vehicle, but also took out the communication array for the entire Nexian eastern flank. "Billy's really good at making friends," commented the child's apparent guardian, an elderly human female who was calmly reloading a rifle that was almost as tall as she was. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the engineer who had been producing improvised explosives from farming equipment, had somehow managed to turn the colony's atmospheric processing system into a massive area denial weapon. She released what she called agricultural chemicals into the air above Nexian positions. The chemicals turned out to be concentrated capsaicin compounds extracted from something humans called ghost peppers. While not lethal, the compounds made it impossible for Nexian troops to see, breathe, or think clearly. "Don't worry," Dr. Martinez assured Zethkri over the comm. "It's completely non-toxic. We use this stuff to flavor food back on Earth." The idea that humans voluntarily consumed substances that could incapacitate trained military personnel was somehow more disturbing than their combat tactics. As the battle continued, Zethkri began to notice patterns in human behavior that defied everything he understood about military psychology. When their ammunition ran low, they improvised weapons from battlefield debris. When their equipment was damaged, they repaired it using materials scavenged from destroyed enemy vehicles. Most remarkably, when they were wounded, they seemed to become more effective rather than less. Corporal Davis had taken a plasma bolt to the shoulder early in the engagement. Instead of seeking medical treatment, he had used his damaged arm as an improvised club while continuing to fight with his uninjured hand. When asked why he had not reported to the medical station, his response was that he was saving the good arm for important stuff. The important stuff turned out to be single-handedly destroying a Nexian artillery position using nothing but his sidearm and what he called creative thinking. Lieutenant Foster had been caught in an explosion that left her partially deaf and covered in burns. Her response was to commandeer a Nexian hoverbike and use it to conduct reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines. When she finally returned to base, She brought detailed intelligence on enemy positions along with 3 captured Nexian officers. "Sorry I'm late," she had said cheerfully. "Got a little turned around out there. But look what followed me home." The captured Nexian officers stared at her with expressions of profound trauma. It was then that the Nexian commander made a decision that would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy. Faced with an enemy that seemed to become stronger when injured, more creative when desperate, and happier when outnumbered, he decided to negotiate. The request for parley came through on standard diplomatic channels. Kane's response was to invite the Nexian commander down for what she called a friendly chat over coffee. Zethkri had observed many military negotiations during his career. They typically involved formal protocols, detailed discussions of terms, and careful consideration of strategic implications. Human diplomatic meetings, he discovered, were conducted very differently. The Nexian commander arrived with a full honor guard and enough firepower to level a small city. He was met by Captain Kane, who was sitting on the porch of a damaged building, drinking from a metal cup and looking like she was enjoying a quiet afternoon. "You guys want some coffee?" she asked conversationally. "Thompson makes it strong enough to wake the dead, but it grows on you." The Nexian commander, a massive warrior whose purple chitin armor was decorated with the symbols of conquest from 17 different worlds, stared at the small human female in bewilderment. "You wish to discuss terms of surrender?" he asked formally. Kane nearly choked on her coffee. "Surrender? Oh no, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I thought you wanted to surrender to us." The silence that followed was deafening. "We outnumber your forces 4-1, the Nexian commander said slowly. "Yeah, that's unfortunate for you guys," Kane replied sympathetically. "But don't feel bad about it. You're not the first ones to make that mistake. We have orbital bombardment capabilities. Had orbital bombardment capabilities. Past tense. Sarah's been using your ships for target practice for the last hour." Kane gestured toward the sky, where the burning wrecks of Nexian warships were creating an impressive light show as they fell toward the planet's surface. The Nexian commander looked up at what remained of his fleet and made a sound that Zethkri's translator rendered as distressed confusion. "We are the Crimson Guard of the Nexian Empire," he said, as if repeating the words might make them more meaningful. "We have conquered 17 worlds. We do not surrender." Kane nodded sympathetically. "That's what the last guys said too. How'd that work out for them?" What followed was perhaps the most unusual military negotiation in galactic history. Instead of discussing territorial concessions or prisoner exchanges, Kane offered the Nexian forces a choice. They could leave the system immediately and never return, or they could stay and find out why humans called Earth a death world. To emphasize her point, she had Martinez demonstrate what humans called recreational activities. Martinez picked up a large rock and threw it at another rock approximately 50 meters away. The thrown rock shattered the target rock completely. "That's called skipping stones," Kane explained to the bewildered aliens. "It's what human children do for fun." She then had Private Chen show off human playground games by climbing a 30-meter damaged communications tower using only her hands and feet, while carrying a full combat pack. "We call that jungle gym training," Kane said. "Basic childhood development." Finally, she asked Dr. Martinez to explain human cooking techniques. Dr. Martinez cheerfully described how humans regularly consumed foods that were spicy enough to cause chemical burns, hot enough to boil water, and, in some cases, actually on fire when eaten. "We call it cuisine," Kane explained. "It's how we show affection." The Nexian commander stared at the humans for a long moment. Then he looked at his honor guard, whose weapons were no longer pointed at the humans, but were instead held in defensive positions, as if the aliens expected the humans to attack at any moment. Finally, he looked back at Kane and said something that would be remembered in military history texts for generations. "We surrender." The surrender of the Nexian Crimson Guard sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy that would be felt for generations. The Crimson Guard had been considered the finest military force in known space, their conquest of 17 worlds a testament to their tactical superiority and overwhelming firepower. Their complete defeat by a small human garrison was not just a military victory. It was a fundamental challenge to everything the galactic community understood about warfare. Commander Zethkri found himself in the unprecedented position of having to write a report that no one would believe. "Sir," Subcommander Veltar said quietly as they watched human soldiers sharing their rations with captured Nexian troops, "how do we explain this to High Command?" Zethkri studied the scene before him. Sergeant Martinez was teaching a group of young Nexian soldiers how to play something called poker, using ammunition casings as betting chips. The Nexian soldiers, who had been trained since birth for conquest and warfare, were laughing at Martinez's jokes and competing to see who could learn the game fastest. Captain Kane was conducting what she called a debriefing session with the captured Nexian commander. The debriefing session appeared to consist mainly of Kane sharing stories about other battles she had fought, while the alien commander listened with the fascination of someone hearing fairy tales. "You mean to tell me," the Nexian commander was saying, "that you once defeated an entire Krellian battle fleet using nothing but mining equipment and what you call creative problem-solving?" Kane nodded cheerfully. "The Krellians were good sports about it, actually. Their admiral sent me a bottle of something called Victory Wine after we let them go. Tasted like paint thinner, but it's the thought that counts." Dr. Sarah Martinez had set up what she called a cultural exchange program, where she taught Nexian engineers how to build what humans considered basic improvised weapons. The Nexian engineers, members of a species renowned throughout the galaxy for their technological prowess, took notes frantically as she demonstrated how to create military-grade explosives using household chemicals. "The key," she explained patiently, "is understanding that most cleaning supplies are just industrial chemicals in smaller containers. Scale up the mixture, add a simple timer, and you've got yourself a bunker buster." One of the Nexian engineers raised a tentacled appendage. "But Dr. Martinez, these substances are present in most civilian habitats. You're saying any human settlement could produce military-grade ordnance in a matter of hours?" "Hours?" Sarah looked confused. "Why would it take hours? If you know what you're doing, you can whip up a batch in about 20 minutes, less if you're not worried about safety protocols." The Nexian engineers exchanged glances that conveyed depths of existential terror that their language had no words for. But perhaps the most disturbing cultural exchange was taking place in the medical bay, where Thompson was demonstrating human first aid techniques to captured Nexian medics. "So, you just push the bone back into place?" asked the lead Nexian medical officer, his voice betraying profound confusion. "Pretty much," Thompson replied, demonstrating the technique on a volunteer human patient who had suffered a compound fracture during the battle. "Sometimes you need to use a splint, but mostly it's just about making sure everything's lined up properly." The human patient, whose arm had been broken in 3 places, was casually eating what humans called a sandwich while Thompson worked. "Doesn't it cause severe pain?" the Nexian medic asked. "Oh, sure," the patient replied cheerfully. "Hurts like hell, but you get used to it. This is nothing compared to the time I got kicked by a horse." The Nexian medics stared at him in horror. "You allow large quadrupeds to strike you for recreational purposes." "Well, not on purpose," the human admitted. "But it happens. Occupational hazard of ranch work." The concept that humans engaged in daily activities that were more dangerous than military combat was proving difficult for the aliens to process. Zethkri was pulled from his observations by an urgent communication from the Galactic Defense Network. News of the Nexian surrender had reached the core worlds, and the political implications were staggering. The Nexian Empire had been one of the three major military powers in the galaxy. Their defeat by a single human colony had every other spacefaring civilization reevaluating their strategic positions. Some were calling for immediate diplomatic contact with humanity. Others were demanding that human expansion be contained before they upset the balance of power further. But the most common reaction, according to the intelligence reports flooding in, was simple disbelief. "Commander Zethkri," came the voice of Admiral Thexavon, the sector commander, over the secure channel. "I have received your preliminary report. Are you certain of your facts?" Zethkri looked over at where Captain Kane was demonstrating human recreational combat techniques to a fascinated audience of Nexian officers. She had just finished explaining something called arm wrestling and was now showing them human boxing using a volunteer from her own troops. The volunteer, Private Williams, was grinning widely as Kane landed what appeared to be devastating blows to his head and torso. Instead of falling unconscious or calling for medical assistance, Williams was offering suggestions on her technique. "Try hooking more with your left, Cap," he advised between punches. "You'll get better leverage that way." "Admiral," Zethkri replied carefully, "I am certain of what I have observed. However, I am no longer certain of my ability to adequately describe it." The pause that followed was telling. "Commander, are you requesting psychological evaluation?" Before Zethkri could answer, another voice cut into the conversation. It was Captain Kane, who had apparently been monitoring their communications. "Admiral Thexavon, this is Captain Lisa Kane, commanding officer of Haven's Rest Garrison. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with Commander Zethkri." The silence on the channel was deafening. A human had just casually intercepted secure military communications between two high-ranking alien officers and announced herself as if she were joining a casual conversation. "How did you access this channel?" Admiral Thexavon asked finally. "Oh, that? Sarah rigged up a communications intercept system using parts from a destroyed Nexian command vehicle. Took her about 10 minutes. She says your encryption is pretty basic once you understand the mathematical principles behind it." Zethkri could practically hear Admiral Thexavon's worldview cracking. "Admiral," Kane continued cheerfully, "I wanted to let you know that we're planning a little celebration for our new Nexian friends. Sort of a welcome to the neighborhood party. You and your people are welcome to join us if you'd like." Celebration? Sure. We've got music, food, and Williams is going to demonstrate traditional human recreational activities. Should be fun. The traditional human recreational activities turned out to be something called a barbecue, which involved cooking food over open flames while consuming beverages that contained what humans called alcohol. The alcohol, Zethkri learned, was a mild toxin that humans consumed voluntarily because it made them feel relaxed. The Nexian prisoners, initially suspicious of being offered food and drink by their captors, gradually warmed up to the humans' inexplicable hospitality. Soon, members of the most feared military organization in the galaxy were participating in human party games and learning human folk songs. The folk songs were particularly disturbing. They told stories of human military victories, but instead of glorifying conquest and domination, they celebrated concepts like friendship, perseverance, and home cooking. One song, which seemed to be especially popular, was about a human soldier who had defeated an entire enemy army because they had insulted his mother's biscuits. "The thing about humans," the Nexian commander explained to Zethkri as they watched the celebration, "is that they don't fight like soldiers. They fight like what?" Zethkri prompted. "Like family members protecting their home." It was an astute observation. Unlike professional military forces who fought for duty, honor, or conquest, humans seemed to fight with the passionate intensity of individuals defending something precious and irreplaceable. Every human settlement wasn't just a colony to them. It was their home. Every human civilian wasn't just a non-combatant. They were family, friends, neighbors worth dying for. This explained why human military tactics seemed so unconventional. They weren't following the strategic doctrines taught in military academies. They were following the instincts of a species that had evolved to protect their pack, their territory, their young against any threat, regardless of size or odds. Dr. Martinez had set up what she called a science demonstration, where she showed Nexian engineers how humans had solved various technical problems during the battle. The demonstrations were enlightening in ways that were both impressive and terrifying. So when we needed more power for the mining laser, she explained, we just rerouted energy from all the non-essential systems in the colony. Non-essential systems? Asked a Nexian engineer. You know, life support, artificial gravity, structural integrity fields, stuff like that. The Nexian engineers stared at her in horror. You deactivated life support during a military engagement? Well, yeah. We figured we could hold our breath long enough to finish the battle. Besides, half the buildings were already damaged, so gravity wasn't really helping much anyway. The concept of deliberately sabotaging their own infrastructure to gain tactical advantage was something that no military academy in the galaxy taught, mainly because no sane species would consider it. But what if the battle had lasted longer than you could hold your breath? The engineer pressed. Sarah shrugged. I guess we would have figured something out. We usually do. This casual confidence in their ability to figure something out seemed to be a defining characteristic of human psychology. Where other species planned extensively and prepared for contingencies, humans appeared to simply trust that they would find solutions to problems as they arose. The most disturbing part was that this approach seemed to work. As the celebration continued, Zethkri found himself in conversation with Captain Kane about the broader implications of what had happened. Captain, do you realize what this victory means for galactic politics? He asked. Kane paused in her consumption of something called a burger, which appeared to be a sandwich containing enough protein to feed a Valorian family for a week. Not really, she admitted. Should I? The Nexian Empire was one of the 3 major powers in known space. Their military defeat will create a power vacuum that could destabilize dozens of systems. Kane nodded thoughtfully. That sounds complicated. Good thing it's not my problem. Not your problem? Captain, you're the one who defeated them. Commander, I'm a soldier, not a politician. My job is to protect this colony and the people in it. Galactic politics is way above my pay grade. She took another bite of her burger. Besides, from what I've seen of galactic politics, you folks could probably use a little shaking up. Zethkri realized that humans genuinely did not understand the galactic significance of what they had accomplished. To them, the defeat of the most feared military force in known space was just another Tuesday. They had done what needed to be done to protect their home, and now they were ready to get back to their normal lives. The normal lives, it turned out, included things that were arguably more dangerous than military combat. Private Chen was explaining to a group of fascinated Nexian soldiers that she had originally trained as something called a stunt performer, which involved deliberately placing herself in dangerous situations for the entertainment of other humans. So you voluntarily leap from great heights, allow yourself to be set on fire, and crash vehicles into obstacles? Asked one of the Nexians. Yeah, it's great fun, Chen replied enthusiastically. The trick is knowing how to fall properly and having good insurance. Sergeant Martinez was describing his previous occupation as something called a roughneck, which involved extracting petroleum products from deep underground using controlled explosions. We'd set off charges that could level city blocks, he explained. But we'd do it so precisely that we could crack open a rock formation without damaging the equipment sitting right on top of it. This was your civilian occupation? The Nexian commander asked in disbelief. Yep, best job I ever had until the oil dried up. That's when I decided to join the military for something safer and more relaxing. The Nexian commander looked like he was having an existential crisis. As the evening wore on, Zethkri found himself composing his official report in his head. How could he possibly explain to his superiors that humanity's military effectiveness came not from superior technology or strategic brilliance, but from the simple fact that they had evolved on a world so dangerous that military combat was actually less stressful than their daily lives? How could he describe a species that treated life-or-death battles as recreational activities, converted medical equipment into weapons systems in their spare time, and celebrated military victories by cooking food over open flames while consuming mild toxins? Most importantly, how could he convey the unsettling realization that this had not been humanity showing off their military might? This had been humans on a lazy Tuesday dealing with an unexpected interruption to their normal routine. The real question wasn't how humans had defeated the Nexian Empire. The real question was what would happen when they actually tried. As if reading his thoughts, Captain Kane appeared beside him with 2 cups of the coffee that was strong enough to dissolve metal. "You look worried, Commander," she observed. "Captain, I am trying to understand how to classify humanity's threat level for galactic security purposes." Kane laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both warm and terrifying. "Commander, we're not a threat to galactic security. We're just people trying to make a living and protect our homes." She paused to sip her coffee. "But if someone wants to threaten our homes, well, they're welcome to try. Just remember that what you saw today was us being polite." Zethkri stared at her. "Polite? Sure. We could have been really creative if we'd wanted to, but we figured these Nexian boys were just doing their jobs, no point in being mean about it." As Zethkri watched Captain Kane walk back to the celebration, where humans and Nexians were now engaged in something called a dance contest, he realized that his report was going to be very, very long, and that the galaxy was going to have to fundamentally reconsider its assumptions about warfare, diplomacy, and the nature of what constituted a civilized species. The humans, meanwhile, were planning a rematch tournament where they would teach their new Nexian friends more human games. It was going to be a very interesting century.